Hi, this is episode 13 of Beating BDD, a podcast about body dysmorphic disorder from the BDD Foundation in the UK. I'm your host Claire Atherton, and for this episode I spoke to Tim White. When I first met Tim at the BDD conference in November, I was really impressed by how quickly he'd managed to recover after 15 years of suffering from the disorder. His turnaround story will give hope to anyone who thinks they'll never get better. Welcome to the podcast, Tim. Thanks ever so much for agreeing to come in.
Hello, thanks for having me.
One thing I read about you, because you've written something previously about your experience with BDD, hadn't you, for the BDD Foundation website. The one thing that really stuck with me was you described having a BDD as being taken over by an infection or virus.
Yeah.
Would you say you've still got that virus, but it's weaker than it was? Or would you say that your body's got rid of it completely, or that you've got rid of it completely?
I would say it's gone now. And my thoughts are more, I still have intrusive thoughts, but I'm much more able to deal with them, and I can let them go a lot quicker than I did when I was ill. The whole virus thing, that's just what it felt like. I don't know if it's scientific or not. But it did feel like my brain was like hijacked and took over the normal, like healthy cells and multiplied and spread like across my whole brain. So yeah, and then I got therapy. I got BDD therapy, CBT, and that seemed to be the antidote, so the BDD.
Fantastic. We'll come back to that when we talk a bit more about your experiences. If I'd met you 10 years ago and I'd asked you to describe how you felt about your physical appearance, what do you think you would have said to me?
I wouldn't have said anything to you.
Really?
Yeah, definitely not. I would have been too ashamed.
Okay.
And too ashamed to talk about anything like that.
It's not something you used to share with anyone?
No. From probably the age of 15 or so to 25, I certainly didn't talk about it. And then when I was about 25, I talked about it with a really good mate of mine. And then from there, I started to think about me not having a problem but being ill.
Mm-hmm. So that was a bit of a turning point.
It was, but it took several years after that to actually get treatment and recover.
When your BDD was at its worst, how important would you say your physical appearance was to you generally in the scheme of things in your life?
It was everything. First thought when I woke up in the morning, last thought when I went to bed, and probably 95% of all my thoughts during the day, and the other 5% was just functioning, being able to get up and get dressed, go to work, which I did. I functioned. But I would say 90 to 95% of my whole day was consumed with these feelings and thoughts.
How does that compare to now?
I'd probably say it's now about 15%. The BDD is intrusive, but I can manage them. I don't see them as part of me anymore, and they're not useful, and I want to have a happy, productive life, so I'm able to let go of those thoughts a lot quicker than I used to. Yeah.
That's fabulous. One thing we also touched upon just when we were chatting before the recording was about choice and acceptance. Yeah. How did those two things matter to you? Or what influence did they have in your recovery?
Well, I think through the process of having treatment, it freed up my brain. So then I was then able to become aware of other ideas. When you're in full-blown BDD, there's no choice. I know objectively there is a choice. You always have a choice, but you're so ill, you can't do anything other than think in a certain way and perform behaviours that you might even know are not helping you, but it's so you have to do it. I think that's something that people who don't have a BDD or other forms of mental health problems don't get, is that you can't act otherwise. Even if you're fully knowing that what you're doing is destructive, you just can't. So I would say when I had BDD, I had no choices. I felt like I had no choices anyway. And then when I recovered, I realised that I was free and I could choose my own thoughts and I could let go of ones that aren't helpful. Yeah, and I think the whole thing about freeing up the brain, it also allowed me to think about things like acceptance and accepting who you are and accepting your body, because your body isn't who you are. You're more than your body.
How then would you describe your relationship with the mirror today? What do you see when you look in the mirror?
I'd say it's pretty healthy. I don't really look in it, to be honest, but I'm not avoiding the mirror. I just don't really look in it because I don't really care about how I look. So much. Obviously, you've got to be presentable, but I had periods when I was ill where I would look in the mirror for hours a day. I'd get home from work and just stand in front of the mirror and I remember once it was 3 hours. And that was on top of other behaviours as well and other just obsessive thoughts all day.
Can you now talk us through your experience with BDD? So when it started, how it came on, how it manifested itself, in as much detail as you like.
Okay. I would say it was BDD at the age of 15. And I probably had thoughts that were characteristics of BDD, but I would say that it's really started affecting my life when I got to 15 and started having girlfriends, and it wasn't just, holding hands, and it started to mean sex. And that's when I became very anxious and thoughts took over my brain that I just couldn't cope with. I couldn't control either. And then with that mindset, I then started having sexual interactions with girls. And because I was already thinking that it's going to go badly, it inevitably did. And any little comment that was made, I took to heart. Yeah, so I had a couple of early experiences with girls that made me feel inadequate and deeply ashamed. And then, so from the age, I would say by 17, I had decided I would never be in a relationship or never have sex. And it went further than that because I would never have any form of relationship because it could inevitably result in them finding out how inferior and inadequate I am, and that would just cause me further pain. So from 17 to 25, I was basically had very few close interactions with people.
How would you describe your feelings during that period?
Oh, just hopelessness and paranoia. But hopelessness I think is the big destroyer, because it removes any possibility of things getting better. Then it's like, well, what's the point if things aren't going to get better? My life is always going to be terrible, and there is no possibility of happiness. It's out the window. There's no chance of it. Emotionally, I decided that. I knew somewhere in my head that rationally that didn't make sense. But it was the emotion of shame was so strong. It totally overtook any part of me that could think logically and rationally. Yeah, I should probably go back a little bit because you asked me how it expressed itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. The BDD expressed itself in all sorts of ways. Looking in the mirror a lot. I would also spend a lot of time on the internet looking up procedures and pills and things. I did that a lot, and I also just looked on forums and just paid attention to some really nasty comments that people were making. And that just fueled my BDD, and it was confirmation bias, because I didn't look for anyone saying anything not like healthy. I just looked for people saying really toxic, horrible things and took that as gospel. So, and I did lots of things. Yeah, it's a bit scary talking about them, but I put because it's a bit funny as well, and so it feeds into my feelings of inadequacy and actually humiliation. But I put padding down my underwear just to make myself feel like a man. And there are jokes about that, like, you know, men stuffing socks down their pants. Yeah, I did that because it temporarily, it artificially buffed me up. Like, and psychologically buffed me up as well, and I could walk down the street confidently. I also went travelling at 18, and because I went to Australia because I've got dual nationality, so I didn't need a visa, and I travelled for a year and a half, and I spent about 10 months of it sleeping rough because the BDD had taken so much control over me that I couldn't be around people. I stayed with my sister for the first 3 months in Melbourne, and then I moved on from there to go to Adelaide, but I didn't make it to Adelaide. I just started sleeping rough because being in the backpackers was too much. People are too close to each other in the dorms, and they're all so young and having fun and talking about and doing all sorts. They're experimenting, and I knew I couldn't experiment because it would result in me being humiliated. So I isolated myself from that, and I did it more and more, and eventually I was sleeping rough. So that was another way that BDD manifested itself.
Was that the lowest point, would you say, at that period? Yeah,
it was. Definitely looking back, that was a really low point. But I just kind of, when you're ill, you don't, it's just what it is. I wasn't going, I'm really, really ill. I was going, this is what I have to do in order to not be humiliated and protect myself from feelings that are too overwhelming. And then just before I got treatment was another low point, but the second time I got better, so I got the right treatment that time. I should also, some of the other ways that BDD manifested itself was with drugs and alcohol, particularly while I was sleeping rough, and those just exacerbated my BDD even more. They helped me distract from the problems for a while, but in doing so it stopped me from ever dealing with my problems.
Sounds very lonely.
It was really lonely, and I kick myself. I don't kick myself about it, but I allowed BDD to take control. I couldn't have done anything otherwise, but now if I ever had really intrusive thoughts, I feel quite empowered. I can choose whether to, not everything obviously, but a lot of mental health is about taking responsibility, I think, for yourself. It's not like not a pressure to do it, but it's so liberating when you do. Yeah.
I guess the benefit is as well that you can recognise obsessive patterns as they start to emerge. If that did happen to you in another way of your life, you might be more likely to recognise that.
Yeah, I think I think BDD, I was basically ill for 15 years because I didn't have either the skills emotionally and just everyday skills to start combating the BDD. But now I do. So if I started behaving in a BDD way, I'd recognise it straight away and I'd do something about it because it took 15 years of my life. That's how I feel about it. And now I know that I have a choice. I can make choices. And when I was ill, I couldn't. Yeah.
How did you get then from that really bad position into the position you're in now? How did you get help?
So December 2016, I knocked on my dad's front door, and I didn't say an awful lot, but I was tearing up, and I wasn't like crying outright, but he could see I was emotionally distressed. And I think we must have had a couple of conversations before that in the months prior, just to say I wasn't well. I'm really unwell, I said. He recognised it straight away, and he made me an emergency appointment with the GP, and I went, and I knew what I had by then. I knew it was BDD. I had looked on the internet and the BDD Foundation and done the questionnaire, and I ticked every box. my GP helped refer me for a private consultation at the Priory, and I went to that, and I had an appointment with Professor Veal, and then really it was a bit of a snowball effect, and the professionals did their jobs really well. Yeah, so I think it was quite a long time from saying I'm really unwell to actually getting the treatment. I think it was less than a year, but it was at least 6 months. And in that time, I read Professor Veal's BDD, I think it's Overcoming BDD, and it's basically a workbook. Yeah, and I just went through all the exercises religiously, and I started to get better. So by the time I actually got into treatment, I'd done half the work, and then treatment just was the catalyst. It was like the last leg, just to sort me out.
Yeah. And what did that consist of? How many sessions did you have?
I had 20 sessions over 5 months. Once a week, I'd just come up from Oxfordshire, come over from Oxfordshire, and meet a therapist and have CBT counselling specifically targeted towards BDD. And I think because it was targeted, it worked.
Do you remember now what you found the most useful aspects of the therapy?
Yeah, really, I think it was the atmosphere of it that helped a lot, because there was someone on my side and there was someone willing to enter into my particular pathology, into my way of thinking. That alone was a relief. Getting the diagnosis first was a major move forward, and then having someone come along with me for the ride who is trained and professional and obviously is a nice person, really helped. But yeah, there were specific things in therapy that we did that helped, and a lot of them were like exposure exercises. And we did a lot. Some we did actually during the therapy session, and some I did homework for and reported back on it the next week.
Some people say that they find the exposures quite scary. Did you find them scary?
Yeah, they were really scary, but also quite a lot of fun.
What was fun about them?
So one experiment that I was talking about how inadequate I felt, and he was saying, well, what evidence do you have? And let's go through the evidence. And he pointed out all the things I was forgetting to include in my thoughts, and there was a bowl of fruit in the middle of the table between us, and he said, "Oh well, let's design an exercise for you to do." Because one of the things I said was that I use padding to beef myself up, and he said, "Well, there's 2 bananas there. Why don't we walk down Camberwell High Street, each with a banana in our pads?" And it's so comical, but it was also really getting to the real fear. I knew there was something comical about the whole situation, but also it was exactly what I needed. It was quite serious in a way as well. And yeah, the next week, we both went down Camberwell High Street with bananas down our trousers, and it was great as well because he did it with me, and that made such a huge difference because he was pointing out what the experience was like for him, someone who doesn't have BDD, and he was that sort of healthy thoughts like, actually this is really uncomfortable, and it keeps wanting to fall out. This is really awkward. And also one of the things we did when we walked down the high street was to look at people, see where people are looking, and no one looked, even with banana down our trousers. No one looked, or if they looked, it was for a flash of a moment, and then they were off. I can't even say they were looking. They were just daydreaming, or they were just walking around, and no one was looking. And I realised how much self-focus I had, and that what I think is happening isn't necessarily happening, and that's been quite a good lesson for me, just in terms of life. Like, when you get really involved in a problem, an issue that you have or that someone has, it's not. There are other ways of looking at everything.
And also, people just aren't thinking about us most of the time.
They're really not.
They're thinking about themselves.
They're really
it's
not.
natural not to think about us.
And they might notice you, but they'll probably notice different things.
Yeah.
All sorts of things that people notice about you. You just, they don't sort of turn on you like someone with BDD turns on themselves.
How did the therapy make you change your behaviour? Because you were obviously doing quite a lot of behaviours before.
It made me stop and think and go through a structured thought pattern. It gave me a sort of framework so that when I had intense feelings and thoughts, I could just use the framework and I could put the thought in at the beginning of the framework, and if I followed the process, a positive result would come at the end, or a neutral one. Sorry, what was the question?
How did the therapy make you change your behaviour?
Yeah, so I stopped looking in the mirror so much. I stopped having an issue with the mirror. I stopped having padding. I started just to wear normal clothes that I didn't care whether they were tight or loose or whatever. I went to the gym a lot. A big thing was getting changed at the gym, which I just couldn't do. And then I was able to get changed at the gym after therapy. Yeah, I changed my behaviour consciously. I knew I needed to go out and socialise. So since the treatment and since recovery till now, I've been contacting friends on a weekly basis, talking to family more, doing more activity, hobbies that I enjoy. And none of that was really possible when I was ill. Because they were also traumatic, doing anything really.
Yeah.
Just being anywhere near a person was actually quite traumatic.
Yeah.
But the therapy addressed the whole relationship issue in a way that encouraged me to get out and meet people and give me a sensible viewpoint of my own body and other people's as well. And the therapy was tailored towards a lot of acceptance, really. Not just acceptance as a buzzword, but doing things where you learn to accept yourself. So, I mean, I did a lot of meditation and that was really helpful. I also wrote a lot. I journaled and I wrote out the healthy way to think so that when I was thinking unhealthily, I could just read it and decide to follow that what I'd written.
Yeah.
And eventually over time I started seeing my friends more, and then as a consequence of that, meeting new people, and I was also doing new hobbies. I like improv and drama and swimming as well, wild swimming.
How did you know when you were better or when you were getting better? Was there a particular sign that for you made it clear?
I knew I was getting better from the moment I had the diagnosis at the Priory Hospital. Just someone recognising and agreeing with me that I was ill. No, it's not the whole thing, because at that point I knew I was ill, but I also thought I was inferior, inadequate. But yeah, from that moment and the few months before, when I went to see my dad, I had to get better or die, basically. That sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? But I was suicidal for sure, and I'd been suicidal at other points in my life, and at other points in my life I had self-harmed and cut myself and taken an overdose of sleeping pills, but I didn't take nearly enough. And yeah, so yeah, I'd say from speaking to my dad and saying I'm ill is when things started getting better, because at that point I had acknowledged that I was ill and not actually inferior or inadequate, and that I was normal. I knew I was psychologically unwell and needed help. So, and then I slowly got better as I got the diagnosis, and then went through the workbook with Professor Veal. Not with him, his book I went through while I was waiting for my appointment at the Maudsley, and then those 20 sessions I was better. Yeah,
that's fantastic. How would you say that you stay well now that you are well? How do you look after yourself?
just by being aware, really, that it's a psychological condition, it's not me. And I don't have to get involved with every thought that I have. I can let them go. Like, that's the whole thing about meditation, is letting thoughts come in and then letting them go out without ever getting involved with them. So I do that daily, and I just make sure I get out and about and meet people and do things that I enjoy, because the alternative is sitting at home and then you start ruminating and playing back the past over and over again. The way I keep myself well is to look forward. I know it might sound a bit vague, but
no, that's great.
I don't get caught up on small details anymore, or what are not unimportant things. And the important things are a healthy body and a healthy mind and healthy relationships. So if I'm doing something or thinking something that is not going to result in any of those three things, then I'll step away from it. Yeah.
So if, before you had therapy, before you were diagnosed even, and the process of recovery began, if your beliefs about yourself were essentially, I'm inferior, I'm inadequate, these kinds of words, what would you say your core beliefs are about yourself now?
I sometimes feel that I'm inadequate and inferior. However, I am not inadequate and inferior. So those thoughts aren't true. I'm feeling it. So it's true. The experience is true, but objectively, they're not true. I have thoughts of, I feel crap about myself. But I think they're a bit more normal, because it's difficult to be a human being and alive, and isn't it? So, but I feel good about myself. I do look forward now and not back so much. I mean, it's good to reflect, but I tend to think about improvement and sustaining well-being. And I feel like a regular person who, like everyone else, is amazing in a lot of ways and not so amazing in other ways, because we're just human, aren't we?
Flawed.
So
yeah, we're all flawed.
Yeah.
Would you say that your experience of having had BDD has had any positive side to it in terms of changing you or changing the way that you perceive the world and other people?
Yeah. I think you can learn I can always learn something positive from any experience. I don't mean you can take happy things from every experience. Some experiences are just crap. But you can learn something about yourself or other people in all the experiences you have. We've all got amazing qualities, and we've all got qualities that are less desirable. But those qualities as well are what makes people and what makes relationships. So it makes closeness between people. So I mean, I think because I've been suicidal and I've self-harmed and I've been homeless, I'm empathetic towards people that are suffering. I think I've probably always been a bit had some empathy, but those particular experiences really, it's to engage with people emotionally and not just logically, and not just as a matter of fact. Not, that I think is just to really connect with someone and see them as they are and look past their bodies and their qualities, even just their behaviours. Just like try and have an intimate interaction with someone, like actually connecting with them, rather than just saying things at them or them saying things at you.
If dating was an insurmountable problem when you were really suffering with BDD, how is it now?
Great.
Good.
Really good. Yeah, I've had a few relationships since I've got out of therapy, and it's just so much different. I can have girlfriends now, and it wasn't a possibility when I was ill. And what's great about it is just being with someone and sharing ideas and having closeness and a laugh, and also sharing problems. I really love that, and I was starved of it while I was ill. And so it's been a bit of a roller coaster, actually, in terms of having relationships with people, because in some ways I'm quite inexperienced, but actually I realise that everyone has problems, doesn't matter how they're experienced they are. And we've all got hang-ups, and we can help each other just by loving each other.
What would you say to a person who's maybe in their teens or early 20s and they're going through the times that you had when you were that age? What advice would you have, or what would you want them to know?
I think I'm a bit wary about giving advice, because I'm not like an oracle or anything.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like that because one advice, sometimes what works for one person doesn't work for someone else.
Maybe it's more than what would you say to someone who's in their sort of early teens or 20s, between early 20s, who's suffering like you did?
Get help. Talk to your friends and your family. Say what's bothering you. Yeah, and I was going to say don't be afraid to say, but there will be fear, but that's okay. Communicate with people is the biggest thing. Don't withdraw. Don't isolate yourself. Understand that you're a human being and you're flawed. Right? You're not perfect, and you don't have to be. Really deeply feel that. I mean, I've done it partly through meditation, just talking to people and sharing ideas. But when you're actually ill, that's not actually possible. So I think the advice is get help. Get yourself to the right person that can help you, or can get you on the journey to recovery.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim.
All
it was
right,
really nice to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming in.
All right, cheers.
Excellent. Bye. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Tim, and thanks very much to him again for sharing his BDD experience. If you'd like to read the book you mentioned, it's called Overcoming Body Image Problems, including Body Dysmorphic Disorder, and it's co-authored by David Veal, Rob Wilson and Alex Clark. To hear more episodes, just search for Beating BDD on major podcast apps and Spotify. I'll be back with another interview soon. In the meantime, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.